thank you very much, everyone that's come here to the press conference in person, and welcome to the people following us online and the journalists following us via Zoom. FATF President T. Kumar will give an overview of the outcomes of this, which was the sixth and final plenary under his presidency, and also talk a little bit about his achievements. And then we have time for some questions. People in the room, there's a mic, and if you could give your name and the name of your media. And for the people on Zoom, if you raise the hand using the icon, then I will unmute the mic and you can ask your question directly to Raja. Thank you very much. Raja, over to you.
Well, thank you, Spencer. A very good afternoon and a warm welcome to all those joining us in person here in Singapore, as well as those joining us virtually. The FATF has just completed an intensive 6 days of both plenary and working group meetings with delegates from across the world. Before I go through the outcomes of this plenary, let me say that the fight against financial crime is really crucial for all of society. Amongst other things, it deprives criminals of profits which would otherwise be reinvested in cybercrime, drug smuggling, terrorism, or other crimes. It also supports economic growth and development by ensuring higher investment confidence. Let me now move on to the outcomes of this plenary. Strengthening global asset recovery is a key priority of my presidency. At this plenary, the FATF finalized its methodology to assess countries' implementation of the updated asset recovery standards in the upcoming round of mutual evaluations. This provides a comprehensive suite of initiatives to drive greater global asset recovery, and we expect all countries to take concrete steps to promptly implement the revised standards. The FATF this week also finalized a report on professionals who facilitate the laundering of proceeds of corruption and other crimes. This is the first international international comparison of the measures that FATF members have in place to prevent gatekeepers. Who am I referring to? Examples are corporate service providers, accountants, lawyers, and real estate agents. And it is clear that many countries need to do more. Watch out for the publication of this report in the upcoming weeks. We also agreed on 2 mutual evaluation reports for India and Kuwait that will be published after the post-plenary quality and consistency process. This brings to an end 2 years of hard work by all involved, and I would like to congratulate them for successfully completing this process. Now let me turn to FATF's identification and review of jurisdictions with strategic AML, CFT, and CFP deficiencies. This week, we achieved a key strategic milestone by revising the criteria for prioritizing countries that we look at. These changes will apply in the next round of evaluations that have just commenced. It will make the process even more risk-based and cognizant of the capacity challenges faced by the least developed countries. 2 countries are coming onto the list of jurisdictions under increased monitoring, referred to informally as the FATF's grey list. And here I'm talking about Monaco and Venezuela. Let me first start off with Monaco. Despite significant progress that has been achieved since 2022, Monaco needs to address strategic deficiencies such as, let me just give 3 examples. One example is it needs to demonstrate that its supervisors use the full range of regulatory sanctions that are available to them. The second area for improvement includes completing its program to provide its financial intelligence unit with the necessary resources. And the third area, and this is a relevant one in particular for Monaco, given its risk and context, is that it needs to apply effective, dissuasive, and proportionate sanctions for persons convicted of money laundering. I move on now to Venezuela. The strategic deficiencies that Venezuela needs to address include, first example, supervising its financial institutions and non-financial sectors to ensure that they are effectively preventing money laundering and terrorist financing. The second area is investigating and prosecuting money laundering and terrorist financing. And the third area is ensuring that measures to prevent the abuse of non-profit organizations, that these are proportionate and do not disrupt legitimate non-profit activities. Both countries have agreed to action plans to address those deficiencies, and I urge them to complete the action plans as soon as possible. There are two countries coming off the grey list. These are Jamaica and Turkey. On Jamaica, a FATF team visited Jamaica in April this year and confirmed that substantial steps had been taken to improve its AML, CFT, and CPF program and address all items on its action plan. These included enhancing its risk understanding on money laundering and terrorist financing, implementing risk-based supervision to its financial institutions, and the third example I will cite is demonstrating that accurate and up-to-date beneficial ownership information, that this is available on a timely basis. On Turkey, Turkey entered the grey list in October 2021. Turkey will also be removed from the grey list. A FATF team visited Turkey in May this year and confirmed that they have taken substantial steps to improve on its AML, CFT, and CPF regime and addressed all items on its action plan. These included, and let me just give 3 examples, conducting complex money laundering investigations and prosecutions. Second area, pursuing terrorist financing investigations and prosecutions in line with their risks. And the third area is implementing a risk-based approach to supervision. The FATF plenary determined that both countries' efforts are ongoing and sustainable, and they have demonstrated the necessary political will to both uphold and continue these changes. I would add, and this is an important aspect to add, that coming off the grey list does not mean that they have a perfect system in place. There is still more work to do for these countries. All countries, in fact, exiting the FATF's list remain subject to continued monitoring. They will need to continue to address the weaknesses that have been identified, and they need to remain vigilant and react to evolving risks. Regarding the FATF's list of high-risk jurisdictions subject to a call for action, informally referred to as the FATF's blacklist, the FATF reiterated its serious concerns over the DPRK's continued failure to address the significant deficiencies in its AML, CFT, and CFP regime, and the serious threats posed by its illicit activities related to the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and its financing. The DPRK has increased connectivity with the international financial system, and this raises proliferation financing risks. Therefore, the FATF calls for greater vigilance and renewed implementation and enforcement of countermeasures against the DPRK. On membership issues, there is no change to the membership status of the Russian Federation, and it remains suspended on the same basis as was announced in February 2023. This is my 6th and final plenary as President of the Financial Action Task Force, And so I'll conclude my remarks by briefly outlining the achievements of the Singapore Presidency over the past 2 years. We have focused on addressing contemporary challenges in combating illicit finance, including those stemming from cyber-enabled fraud. And the second major thematic area has really been strengthening the FATF's institutional framework to ensure that the FATF is well poised to tackle current and future challenges. Let me elaborate, and I will start off first on addressing contemporary challenges. The work that we have done on asset recovery, beneficial ownership transparency, and virtual assets over the past 2 years, they all mutually reinforce each other. By giving law enforcement and national authorities more tools in this fight, countries can now lift the veil and find out where criminals are hiding their dirty money, including virtual assets, and go after it to ensure that crime does not pay. Recovered assets can be used to refund victims, or if they can't be identified, to reinvest in health, education, crime prevention, or other community purposes. Interpol's Secretary General, Jürgen Stock, recently said that a maximum of only 2 to 3% of criminal proceeds are recovered. This is better than estimates of 1% a decade ago, but is still far too low for decisive impact. When countries effectively implement these standards, our efforts will bear fruit. Next, moving on to strengthening the FATF's institutional framework. I'm proud of our increasing support for the global network. By making the FATF more inclusive and providing training and support to our regional partners, we aim to ensure that the overall global AML, CFT, and CFP regime is strengthened. Another milestone is the ministerial commitment that we obtained in April this year to increase the sustainability of FATF's funding. This is crucial to ensure that the FATF is placed on a stable footing to deliver on its strategic priorities, particularly the new round of mutual evaluations. Lastly, I would also like to highlight the Women in FATF and Global Network initiative that I started. A key highlight was the launch of the e-book earlier this week titled Breaking Barriers, Inspiring the Next Generation of Women Leaders. At the FATF, I'm also pleased to see that we are setting a good example by having a strong female leadership team with Violette Clerc, who is present here today as Executive Secretary, and Elisa de Anda Madrazo as incoming President. Before I take questions, I would like to remind you that all the key outcomes of this plenary are outlined in the documents that you should have received by now. I will now take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Raja. We have a lady here with a question.
Hi, I'm Janyapon Janjaran from Bloomberg. I would like to ask a question about Russia. Between having the membership suspended and putting it on blacklist, which one is worst for the country, and what would be the step to go on blacklist? I mean, being suspended, is it still going to lead to a pass to blacklist? Thank you.
What I can say is that these are two distinct things. FATF decided, and this was an unprecedented decision, to essentially suspend the Russian Federation from its membership. This means that Russia no longer takes on a leadership role and is not present as a Russian delegation at FATF's meetings. Whatever decisions are taken on other areas are taken distinctly, and there are distinct processes to be followed. We are a technical organization at the end of the day, and we will follow our technical rules on that front. Thank you.
Roger, do you want to talk?
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Felice Solomon from the Wall Street Journal. You mentioned that you've had a focus on virtual assets. I'd like to know how close or how far your member jurisdictions are to harmonizing their regulatory regimes on this, and what do you see as the biggest vulnerabilities?
Okay, thank you for that question. You know, there's still, it's still a work in progress, I must say, in terms of, you know, jurisdictions having a very good assessment of the risks posed by it, and then taking the necessary legislative measures to ensure that they have a robust legal framework to then adequately and properly regulate this industry. This is still at the nascent stage, and I think there's still a lot of room for improvement. What we urge countries to do is essentially, you know, put in place the necessary legislative frameworks. And it's important for them to also learn of each other, because there are some countries that are more advanced in this space, and actually there's a lot that can be learned from the countries that have actually progressed in their legislation. But very importantly, I also want to stress, having the legislation in place is not sufficient. What is really important is then fully and effectively implementing the legislation so that it has the desired impact.
Do we have any more questions from the floor? Okay, we'll take some questions online now. We have one here from Ulrich Lindsay, if we could unmute him.
Hello, I have one question. It was noted that the FATF achieved a milestone in approving revised criteria for gray listing and blacklisting. Could you confirm whether this is limited to standards on asset recovery, or does it go further?
Okay, thank you for that question. Essentially, this week, FATF agreed on new rules on the revised ICRG prioritization threshold. With these new rules, the impact is that we are gearing the ICRG more to risk. We have made it explicit that FATF members that fall short in demonstrating effective anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing regimes will be listed automatically. This underlines the high accountability that FATF holds itself to. We are also increasing transparency. The new rules and the entire ICRG procedures, once updated, will be publicly available in full on the FATF website. Importantly, we also take into account the capacity challenges faced by least developed countries. In April this year, the FATF ministers decided to further support low-capacity countries in strengthening their anti-money laundering and countering of terrorist financing systems. The new rules give those least developed countries that pose a significant money laundering, terrorist financing, or proliferation financing risk more time to work on their action plans. Moreover, low-capacity countries with limited financial sectors will no longer automatically enter active ICRG review. Instead, these countries will be monitored through the enhanced follow-up process, which is a separate process. So I think this is really a major step forward and would really benefit the least developed countries. We are also, urging, countries that have good and strong capabilities and high capacity to lean forward to help these less developed countries. So the overall aim, is to essentially push up and level up the capabilities and capacity of countries across the global network. And this would mean a far stronger global financial system that is more resilient as well.
Thank you, Raja. Can I remind the journalists online if they would introduce themselves and give the names of their media before they ask a question? That would be great. Ta-da.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Keisha Taasan from the Philippine Star. I have two questions in relation to the Philippines. How many deficiencies does the Philippines still need to address to strengthen its AML-CFT regime? And what are the chances that the Philippines will be elevated to the blacklist since it has been in the gray list for 3 years already or since 2021? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. Just to recap, the Philippines entered the FATF's grey list in June 2021. Its action plan timelines expired in January 2023, and 3 out of 18 action items remain outstanding. Put another way, it means that the Philippines has actually taken action on 15 of the 18 action items that it needed to act on. The Philippines continues to demonstrate steady progress, including increasing money laundering investigations and prosecutions in line with its risks. And I was pleased to note that we actually had a senior person from the Philippines present at the FATF plenary, demonstrating the Philippines' strong political commitment to essentially continue its progress on this front. However, the Philippines should quickly address the remaining 3 action items, and these are: they need to implement controls to mitigate their money laundering and terrorist financing risks that are linked to casino junkets. They also need to apply measures to all main ports to essentially detect false declarations of currency and confiscate illicit proceeds in line with its risks. And the third area that it still needs to work on and complete would be to prosecute terrorist financing in line with its risks. Thank you.
David, did you have your hand up at one moment?
Hi there, sorry, David from Bloomberg. Just a dumb question. I saw Myanmar is facing countermeasures. It doesn't adopt its measures by, I think it was October of 2024, according to the handout. What exact countermeasures would come into play?
Can you say that again? Could you
It's
repeat
for
your question, please?
Myanmar
Yeah.
specifically, yeah. What sort of countermeasures would come into play in October if it's unable to change course?
I think that's premature to speculate on at this point in time. I must say that Myanmar has made efforts in the right direction, but there's still limited progress on most of the action items. Myanmar must take a number of actions, and this include demonstrate improved understanding of its money laundering risks. They also need to ensure that money laundering is investigated and prosecuted in parallel with the predicate offenses and in line with their risks. So far, 10 out of 15 action items remain outstanding, and the FATF has essentially called on its members to apply enhanced due diligence to business relations and transactions with Myanmar. The FATF has in fact specifically noted, and this is a point that I want to emphasize, we have specifically noted that countries that are applying this enhanced due diligence, they need to ensure that the flows of funds for humanitarian assistance and legitimate non-profit organization activity and remittances, that these are not disrupted. If no further progress is made by October, the FATF will then review this matter again and then come to a decision on whether further action needs to be taken. Thank you.
I have another question online.
Hi, this is Andrew from Straits Times.
Okay.
I'll just have two questions. First on virtual assets. I note that you say 3/4 of jurisdictions are partially or not compliant with FATF standards. So, are there concrete steps that you will be taking to support these countries in order to meet the standards? And second, just to touch a little bit on the grey list, how often do reviews take place on countries that were formerly on the grey list and have gotten out of it? Say, there was a recent leak in the Dubai property data where it was there were multiple properties, multiple assets that were seen to be linked to criminals, to money launderers that are in the UAE, but they have just got off from the grey list this year?
Okay, thank you for that question. Let me just start off with the first question that you asked in relation to FATF and its response to this challenge. Essentially, let me just say up front that countries urgently need to prevent further abuse by criminals of this sector. Many countries are acting too slow on this. And the reality is we can't allow terrorists to raise funds or organized crime groups to launder funds in an unregulated space. That is why the FATF has agreed to basically publicly identify jurisdictions with significant virtual asset activity to show steps being taken to regulate this sector. And this body of work has already been undertaken and completed. We are now essentially working with countries to essentially push for greater implementation of the FATF standards. I give you an example in the area of the travel rule. Implementation has not been good enough, and we've been exhorting countries to essentially learn from those jurisdictions that have made progress on this front, to then learn of them and essentially take on board best practices to essentially then review their legislation and implementation of this legislation. Your next question was on the matter of grey listing and whether what action is taken on countries that have exited the grey list. When a country comes off the grey list, that doesn't mean that it is no longer monitored. In fact, countries coming off the grey list continue to be monitored. If they are a FATF member, FATF continues monitoring them. If they are non-FATF member, then one of our FATF-style regional bodies will continue monitoring their progress. In the case of Dubai, I note that there's going to be another mutual evaluation that is scheduled, which will commence in 2026. So I would urge Dubai to continue to review its AML-CFT regime, take note of the threats that are revealed, and essentially enhance their framework, their legislation, as well as the implementation of their laws. Thank you. Point of clarification, the next round of mutual evaluations for Dubai will actually start in 2025.
Okay, we have another question on the line here.
Good day, David Rose from the Jamaica Observer. So 2 questions. Earlier you had mentioned the methodology revision in terms of how countries are evaluated, which has benefits to not result in them being added to the grey list, for example. So could you expand a little more in terms of what was the prior approach of evaluating countries vis-a-vis this new risk-based approach and its material difference? So that's the first question. The second question is with respect to the strengthening of the institutional framework at FATF. Could you give some more perspective on the developments that happened over time?
I didn't get the second question.
The sound quality is pretty terrible in here, actually.
Should I repeat again?
Could you please repeat the second question?
Sure. So you mentioned the strengthening of the FATF institutional framework. So I was asking, what can you expand a bit more and give some context, further context on the strengthening of the framework?
So, yeah, sorry, the sound quality is not great, and we had trouble identifying exactly what the question was. On the ICRG prioritization threshold, as I've shared, essentially we have, it's very technical, and I don't want to go into the technical details because, you know, that may well confuse people. But the important thing is to talk about how it has been revised to be more risk-based. And I think that is really crucial. And this is actually consistent with the way FATF is also going to conduct the next round of mutual evaluations. We are taking a very close look at the key risks that are presented and how the countries are responding to these key risks. Importantly as well is to highlight the fact that, you know, we are essentially making this process more transparent, and very importantly for the least developed countries, we are a lot more sensitive to their capacity challenges that they are facing. So overall, this is a really positive development, and one that I believe ought to be welcomed by the least developed countries, and we are looking forward to a positive reception by these countries. On your second question, in terms of strengthening institutional framework for the FATF, one of the things that we've been looking at is, as I said, making sure that FATF is well funded for the future, and we've essentially taken action to ensure that. We've also been focusing on our FATF-style regional bodies and the global network, and strengthening the global network, because we know that we are only as strong as our weakest link. And so we need all countries around the world to have robust AML CFT standards and implementation, and we are putting in the necessary framework and support to essentially enable countries that are behind the curve to essentially enhance their legislation and their implementation. We have to take a look at the outcome that we are looking for, which is a stronger global financial system.
Thank you, Raja. We'll take just one more question and then we'll have to close the press conference. The mic is open.
Hi there, Paul O'Donoghue here from AML Intelligence. Just have two questions. Apologies, I don't think the sound-off quality is great. But one is just, why is Turkey coming off the grey list when there have been multiple instances of Turkish entities being linked to funding Russia's invasion of Ukraine? And then two, just on Russia itself, could you expand a bit as to why the country isn't being blacklisted after Ukraine called for that, following Russia's deeper ties to North Korea?
Okay, let me deal with your first question. Turkey has been taken off the grey list because of the substantial progress that it has made. A FATF team visited Turkey in May this year, and the team in fact confirmed that Turkey has taken substantive steps to improve its AML, CFT and CPF regime and address all action items on its action plan, including by, and let me just cite some examples, by conducting complex money laundering investigations and prosecutions, pursuing terrorist financing investigations and prosecutions in line with its risks, and implementing a risk-based approach to supervision. This week, FATF determined as plenary that Turkey's AML CFT reforms are ongoing, and importantly, that they are sustainable, and that Turkey has demonstrated the political will to uphold and continue these changes. The FATF therefore decided to remove Turkey from the grey list. Now, you have asked a specific question on the NPO area. What we have made very clear is that the FATF encourages Turkey to continue its positive momentum, and in particular, to ensure that it continues implementing a risk-based approach towards NPO oversight for potential terrorist financing abuse that neither disrupts nor discourages legitimate NPO activities. So Turkey's action plan dealt with this issue heads on. It required that Turkey took a true risk-based approach to supervising non-profit organizations. Okay, let me then move to the second question. Can I get that again? Yeah. So the Russian Federation, essentially, at this plenary decided to continue the suspension of the Russian Federation's membership. I can't overemphasize how this is an unprecedented decision, the first time that FATF has ever suspended any member, and Russia no longer plays a leadership role, nor does it attend FATF meetings as a delegation. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. I think there's one extra last question for Reuters who've made them.
Hi, I'm Yantutra from Reuters News. I just want to get your view on from FATF whether they see any improvement coming from Vietnam, especially after they handle a lot of one of the major big corruption cases and a couple of slew other cases with their property sector and others. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question. Vietnam has made limited progress. Vietnam is urged to demonstrate further progress on its action plan and share information with the FATF, including by improving its understanding of risks and increasing domestic coordination and cooperation to combat illicit financial flows. It also needs to strengthen its financial supervision and increase money laundering investigations and prosecutions in line with its risks. So there's major work to be done, and we are encouraging and exhorting the Vietnamese government to essentially press forward with the needed changes to enhance their AML CFT regime. Thank you.
And on that note, I think we will close this press conference. Thank you very much for...
Thank you. Thanks for attending. Thanks.